When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 27, Healing Trauma, Cancer, and the Spiritual Journey. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our truly remarkable and daring guest, Farahana Kassam. Farahana Kassam is a published author and certified mindfulness meditation coach. She is a firm believer that life happens for us, not to us. Her expertise focuses on bringing the practice of mindfulness and meditation to children, educators, parents, and medical professionals in educational, therapeutic, and corporate settings. Through formal training and seminars for adults and creative storytelling for younger audiences, Farahana uses her creativity and passion to bring mindfulness to everyone she serves. She continues to take her life experiences and turn them into her life purpose. One of her quotes is, "Our life experiences can either be used as a step down or a step up, and we have the power to decide what it will be." Farahana was born in Vancouver, Canada, and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, and currently resides in Dallas, Texas. She is a mother to her beautiful 9-year-old son and claims that she is here to live her best life yet. Hello, Farahana. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hey, Salima. So great to be here.
It's so great to have you. I'm really excited to speak with you today. You are our first episode back from our summer pause. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I am really thankful that you're bringing all of your energy and willingness to be here and share your story. And I'm also really grateful for your support in taking a stance to help me with the bigger mission of breaking barriers of mental stigma.
Awesome, Salima. I'm so happy to share whatever it is that I can share as part of my untold story. And, hopefully it lands on the ears of people who will be able to take at least something away from it.
Absolutely. And on that note of untold stories, this podcast is really bringing forward these stories that people go through, whether it's directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And one thing that's true is that no matter what the story is, there is impact to one's own mental health in some way. And it's an area that usually remains tucked away. So this platform, the intention is to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned by our society. So together, you and I, in the presence of this episode, really it's to encourage people to share and tell what they might have reservations for bringing forward. And I'm bringing forward this trend to help break down the barriers with a new sort of reframe, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. When you hear the words the mental beauty rethink, what comes to mind, Farahana?
You know, I kind of feel like when we've talked about mental health, so many people have shied away from it and just there's been such a taboo. And when you put mental and beauty together, it kind of just ignites a beautiful perspective or at least curiosity that how are these two words side by side in the same sentence? Mental is more inward, it's more inner stuff because you don't get to necessarily, like our brain is not situated outside of our head, right? So you can't necessarily see how beautiful somebody's mental state is until you allow yourself to become more curious and open to share what is in that space. And so it's a beautiful perspective, a beautiful angle to look at somebody's beauty besides just that physical.
That's awesome. It's like the seen and unseen that you're referring to with the inward. And for me, it's that as well as the acceptance, right? That physical health and mental health are both equally important. And even if someone is not in a good mental state, it doesn't have to have such a negative connotation, and that we can have space for both. Just as there is so many different variations of physical beauty, mental beauty can also have the same standard. It's definitely a trend I'm hoping will continue to take, and that we could just continue to help, recondition what we have conditioned. We can kind of change that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So are you ready for the conversation that we're about to have and all the questions I've got for you?
Sure, always, yeah.
Great. So, Farahana, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. What would it say?
It would say things that make you go,
Things that make you go, Okay, you can't just leave me on a cliffhanger, so you're going to have to say a little bit more about this title.
So, of late, I've been really thinking about the experiences that I've been through in my life. I'm 42, and, for the longest time, I felt very much victimized by the experiences that I've had. And since I started the practice of mindfulness and meditation, especially, which has been almost, a little over 6 years now, mindfulness has really taught me to begin to cultivate a relationship with curiosity, things that make you go, anything in life that happens, I believe happens for us. Like you said earlier, when we were sharing a little bit about my background and stuff, when life happens for us and not to us, I think we are able to liberate ourselves from a place of victimhood where we feel powerless and we literally feel like the decisions or actions or other people's doings have the power to shape our lives. I used to believe that. I absolutely do not believe that anymore. Kind of just thought that would probably be it.
It's so invitational, not just the things that make you go, but also the way you ask the question of, why is this happening for me? Rather than, why is this happening to me? I really like how you're able to take that process and go from what you say, victimhood, and, just kind of do a 180 with it. It's semantics in the question.
Absolutely.
And it changes the whole outlook.
Right. One simple word, a substitution, remove the word to and substitute it with the word for. I mean, the entire mindset in that moment creates a whole new story. And this is what I learned over the years and continue to learn, is that I can observe facts that are happening in my life, but the opinions are the fillers. They're kind of the between the lines, right? And that's what creates the story. And so, I think the important thing is we can observe the facts of our experiences in our life. So, is it a fact that I'm divorced? Yes, that's a fact. Everything else that I tell about that is really a perspective. It's an opinion, it's a story. And so on a day-to-day basis, over a period of months, over a period of years, I can certainly tell you that the story that I've told about my divorce has changed. a lot. And I think that story that has changed over time has been very much reflective of where I am on my journey of growth and healing.
Right. So this gets me so interested and intrigued to learn more about this untold story of yours.
Yeah, for sure. I think that over the years, first of all, through healing, there's a lot that had been remained untold that I began to share more openly and more comfortably. But I think what I have not delved into too much on a public platform are the challenges that I had as a child growing up. There have been so many aspects of my life that I've had to heal from. And over the years, there's been a considerable amount of healing. But the one thing that I haven't really openly talked about is the experiences I had growing up in a home environment where my parents absolutely did not get along with each other. And I think the thing that has kept me away from sharing it more openly on a public platform, of course, I've had conversations with my parents about the situation and what it was like growing up with, them not getting along, but not so much brought it on a public platform simply because my biggest fear has been to hurt them, to cause them any kind of embarrassment or shame in the way that they showed up as parents for myself. And because obviously neither of my parents are who they used to be 30 plus, 40 plus years ago. Both of them have changed and gone through their own experiences and growth and healing and so on. So I very much do not see them as the parents who raised me. However, to drudge up painful situations from childhood is something I have hesitated to do. Because in a really interesting way, I think I wanted to protect my parents, who protect who my parents are today to me from the parents who they were 40 plus years ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it actually makes total sense. It's actually really beautiful, as twisted as it might have been as you were experiencing all of it, but the way that you're able to articulate and separate it now, it makes a ton of sense. That speaking on a public platform, yes, you want to be raw, open, and honest, and authentic. But at the same time, to have that fear in the back of your mind that I don't want to hurt or embarrass anyone. I'm not trying to this is not, payback time or something, right? Like that's not your intention. But then to be able to say, yeah, but I want to protect who my parents are today because they have gone through their own transformation. They have worked on themselves. Like, yes, there were things that occurred back then. And yes, I was affected by it, impacted by it, and I need to talk about it. And that's not their identity today. So the fact that you can separate those things is really crucial and critical. Makes tons of sense. Okay, so what's the most prominent age? So from what age to what age did you feel the height of your impact that you experienced of your parents?
So I would say the age range is from about 7 to 16.
So what are the sorts of themes or issues that were the ones that seemed to emerge that created the most friction and trauma for you?
I would say it was the inconsistency where I was not able to understand why there would be interaction, family time, just a normalcy of what family is. And I hate to say normalcy of family, what family is, because there's no such thing. I understand that. But what I'm saying is stability, healthy conversations, nurturing, love, consistency, all of that. There wasn't any of that. It was very haphazard. One day you would have it, the next day, like for the next 3 months, you wouldn't have it. Then you would have it for a week, and then you wouldn't have it for a year. And that back and forth of inconsistency was very confusing to me, and it made me feel very unsafe.
Tell me more about the feeling that like emotionally you felt unsafe.
Yeah, I felt unsafe in the sense that, first of all, I would witness physical abuse. And so that in itself, for me as a child, one would say that children have to be protected, but I took on a role very quickly at a very early age where I was protecting my mom. And so just trying to juggle and understand my role between being a young girl who ultimately was desperate for protection herself, but then abandoning that need and stepping into a role of being a protector. And so, I feel that there was unconsciously, it became automatic for me to suppress the need to feel protected. That wasn't on the agenda. It almost became like there was an unawareness that that was something a child needed. And even if I knew, I don't know, I don't think, actually, I don't even think I knew. I didn't even know that that was an option. So there was no form of expression or even effort to express that, because I was just, for me, my role immediately from a very young age, as I go back and, I can think about it, it's probably about 7, was to protect my mother. Whatever that protection would look like, whether that was coming in between a fight, whatever it was, there was some conflict resolution that I was partaking in from a very young age. I just wanted everybody to get along, and that was just not happening. And somehow I was continuously failing in the ability to have the power to wave a magic wand and make that happen. Not just for my mom, but for my dad. Because, just it was a lot of juggling between the two of them.
I'm curious about, like, at what point did you really start to come to terms with, like, I don't have a magic wand. I'm not going to be able to fix this. This is a bigger problem. This is not for me to fix. At what point did that become clear to you?
I think as I got older and was able to talk to my mom and tell her just leave, because I realized that there were certain decision making she had to do. It had to come from her. And the decisions that she was making, which were to stay, the decisions she was making, which were to play along with this unstable, inconsistent back and forth, that was something that was in her hands. And every time she allowed herself to come back into it and allowed herself to be, to experience calm and peace, no matter how long it lasted, whether it was a day or a week or whatever, I began to resent her deeply for that. So if I would come home and my dad and her were drinking a cup of tea together and they said, hey, come sit with us, those weren't moments anymore that brought me joy. I was past the point where I really wanted them to get along, because seeing them now drinking tea together I couldn't trust that. I couldn't trust the longevity of it. I couldn't trust the authenticity of it. I couldn't trust that this time it was going to be okay. It had been too inconsistent for way too long for me to be able to trust that that was real. So I became very, very, very resentful. I was always resentful towards my dad, but the resentment started to grow towards my mom, because I started to lose trust in her. And to lose trust in her, I think, was the most devastating thing for me. Like, I was heavily relying on her to do the right thing. And again, the right thing, now I understand as an adult, is just a perspective. What I deemed as a right thing, was very different to what she deemed as the right thing. And now that we are, grown women, I've been married, I've been divorced, and this is what I'm talking about, to have the level of protection for her, for who she is now, is very, very important to me. Even if she were to listen, I had like a thought, like, when will mom listen to this and what will she think? Immediately I'm kind of just like, it's wanting me in this moment to reinforce that I am very protective of how she understands my perception of her in this present day, in this present moment. And because, we've had several conversations as women, like I was saying, where I can understand as a married woman with children, being alone in Africa with no family of hers, I can understand how helpless she must have felt. I can understand her struggles because now, as a woman who's been divorced, I have had those struggles. And it's just very interesting because literally, if I were to make a film, and I'm going to speak of us now in the third person, if I were to write a story about these two women, it's a story about two women who, are, I don't know, my mom's what, like 70 now? I'm 40. So we're 30 years apart. And it's a story of struggle of these two women who experience such similar things. It's just like
a parallel process.
Yeah, it's a rerun, And it makes me feel like if I'm to make this movie, Salima, it's not just a story of a woman called Farahana and a woman called Ashraf. This is a story about thousands of women. It's a story about millions of women.
Right.
And the generational patterns that consistently just keep coming around and keep coming around. I mean, I tell my mom all the time that your story, your experiences just lasted longer. Like you were in a close to 30-year marriage. I was in a 7 years to the dot marriage. But in terms of our struggles and all of that, my ex-husband, and I want to make this also very clear that there was any form of physical abuse towards me by my husband. That was not the case at all.
It's the underlying themes of what you struggled with.
Exactly. The underlying themes, the fears, the sacrifices, the expectations, these are all generational issues. These are all gender related generational issues.
And cultural.
There's layers upon layers of influence culturally as well. Although, I think if we open ourselves up to speak to more American women, I'm talking American Caucasian, I'm talking about even Hispanic, you just realize that, yes, there's cultural influence, but I think there's a common thread just by virtue of being a woman.
Universally, yeah.
Yes. And it's surprising because, you'd think, oh, maybe Caucasian women are more like forward thinking and because they're, from the West and not necessarily at all. Because the thing is,
the theme is there. It just shows up a little differently in each culture.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't say weapons, but like the things that pinch, right?
Yes.
It shows up differently in each interaction culturally, but those themes are there of the inequality for the genders.
Yes. And you just, we keep, I think for me, I come from a family where we're 4 girls. And you just kind of sit and think about, again, all the stories that we create about what it means to be a woman. What are the expectations? I mean, one of the things that was, and this is not a story, it was a fact, is my dad always wanted a son.
Mm-hmm.
My father always wanted to have a son, and he got 4 girls. And so what did that really mean? It's funny because we laugh about it now with my mom and I, and I'm like, and I'm going to say this in Gujarati and then obviously translate it. But there's this line that people hear all the time. And it's like, how do you say it? When they go to their husband's home, the famous line is, Tekane parijai, means they get situated. When our daughters get married, they will finally get situated. They'll finally get settled, And it's like, why does marriage become the defining place where, now see? Yes. And you'll hear like our Indian parents talk about, yeah, my daughter got married. Now she's living in America. She's settled down. They have a very good family. The son is so educated. They're so, financially, they're doing so well. It's like all of these external worldly criteria. And we finally can say, oh, thank God, thank you, God, you situated my daughter in a very good home. I just feel like almost like vomiting at that, because it's just, where do those stories come from? They came from generations.
Yeah. And we have to separate the story from the times also. Sometimes the story was required based on circumstance, but the circumstance can change. And if we don't catch up, it's the same thing when there's this woman who told me this story about turkey on Thanksgiving, and how the tradition was to cut off the sides, and no one, and then someone in the family, one of the kids, was doing a project at school and says, my teacher asked me why we cut off the ends, like why do we cut off the sides? And so it's like, oh, I gotta ask my mom, and then the mom asks their mom, and they had to go down this whole line to keep asking, and the answer they got was, the reason that your great 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 grandmother cut off the ends was because the oven was too small.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the ovens that we have nowadays and what we had then, very different. So the tradition was to keep cutting the ends of the turkey. And so people had to buy multiple turkeys to feed the growing family and the growing feast that would come to these events at this family's traditional way of celebrating Thanksgiving, but not understanding that tradition is now obsolete and that could change. And the same thing happens with these issues and the thought process behind them. And why not, when we talk about situated in a very good home, why not talk about, let's make sure she's got all the skills that she needs, right? Like, let's teach her, let's have her embrace and immerse and be her own, and then find a companion, not situate her.
Right. Have you heard that, by the way? Do you speak Gujarati?
I don't, but I have heard that. I've heard that saying.
Yeah, it just irks me. Now it's just laughable. My mom just laughs. She's like, I'm sure even I said it somewhere along the line. I'm like, you probably did, because it was ingrained in you. It's just like part of a normal conversation.
It gets internalized, because I think that moms and aunts and other relatives, uncles and parents, in the South Asian culture, there is this, whether they say, to get situated in a very good home, or once they're married, it'll be fixed. It's also, parents saying things like, oh, you'll be settled then, everything will work itself out once that phase of your life happens. You'll see all the goodness comes after that period. And so it's all alluding to the same message. Right?
Right. And that question, even if you haven't found your partner or whatever, and they ask, when will you settle down now? And it's like, what is the definition of settle down?
Yeah.
Because you could have a thriving career, you could have bought yourself a house, you have a car, you're doing really well, you're very fulfilled, your health is good, all of that is good. And it's like, when are you going to settle down? And it's like, how much more do I need to settle down?
Yeah, I'm settled.
Somehow always seems incomplete. And why are we just not happy and content and fulfilled and appreciative of what is? Why is there still another thing? You get married and somebody's going to turn around and be like, so when are you having kids?
Yeah, no, that happens. It certainly happens.
And that's just too much external pressure,
Well, something I encourage people to say when they come to see me in the therapy room is when they get questions that are very similar to this theme of settled. But if we were to use this theme of settled as the example, when someone comes to an individual to say, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to get this going? I usually do tell the person, like, how would you I inquire with them, like, how would you respond? And I encourage them to think about the perspective, the idea of, like, can you start by saying, I am settled, right? And list, this is how I know I'm settled, right? And what did you mean by settled? So just even to slow that process down, so we can't always get frustrated even though we know that people are shifting from narrative to fact, as you say. We have to slow down as people if we're going to make any change or adjustment. I mean, we can't impose the change and we can't demand it, but if we take the time to slow down and let people know what we really like, how we can respond in a certain way, gives them an opportunity to learn something. And if they learn something, they're building awareness. So when you are aware of something, it's really hard for you to sort of dismiss it once it's really part of your awareness.
Right. And sometimes I just, through the process of like doing the work, doing my own self-reflection, getting out of victim mode, saying I behave this way or I do this or I do that because of what I've been through and which, it is going to influence you. Yes, it is going to shape you, but let's not make that a permanent mold of who you are. Let's not make that an identity of who you are. Let's kind of use that, like I said, as a step up and as an inquiry, and kind of just say, why did all this happen for me? And there's this quote I remember I've read somewhere. It's by Gerald Way, and it says, "One day your life will flash before your eyes. Make sure it's worth watching." And I think to use those experiences as a step up to say, yes, it happened. It's important to acknowledge that. It's important for you to realize how it did temporarily shape you. It doesn't have to be consistently who you are for the rest of your life. All those people who are listening and who can relate to my experiences because they were their experiences too, that's what will connect us. From that point, it's like, great, I'm really glad that I can connect with your experiences and I have empathy for you and all of that. Okay, well, that's great. But now where do we go from here? And I think that is the story that needs to be told. That's the story that needs to be experienced. Those are the opportunities that are going to help us to, grow and become who we are meant to be.
And with that perspective, you're able to take the teachings and the lessons and then apply them to the next situation.
Absolutely.
So you're no longer coming from that poor me place, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. So Farahana, when people come to see me for therapy, they're typically, like in the therapy room, people are typically in one of three places. They're either getting started, they're in the middle, or looking back. And so I'm curious about what part of the journey that you would think that you're in, given the untold story that you've shared at this point. Would you say that you're getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I'm kind of looking back with a lot of ahas. Through the mindfulness journey over 6 years, I think I was like, things that make you go, and the fact that I was exploring mindfulness, I was understanding what it was, how it was going to help me. And then I was so intrigued by the impact of it. But that has continuously had this seed just grow into this massive tree of curiosity. And so I'm at the point, I think, where I'm looking back and I'm observing myself as to whether I'm looking at the story in the same way as I did years ago, or am I still continuing to just be like, be more curious and find another meaning, find another for me situation in it and realize, aha, oh, if that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened. And if that wouldn't have happened, then this wouldn't have happened.
It's a very fascinating process when you start having fun with it. And I really like the way how you were able to articulate, I'm looking back, but I'm trying to figure out if I'm looking back, looking at it from the same lens that I was looking at it initially while I was in it, versus, exploring, trying new things out, like exploring new angles, right? And I love how you were able to just describe that and explain that, because I think it's so important. Yes, we can look back and look at it from the exact same way, from the exact same position, and we can also explore it from different angles and get to those finer and finer points, those finer, really paper thin layers. So Farahana, I'm really curious about, in terms of your untold story and talking about the kind of trauma that you experienced as a child, growing up in a household where there was so much dysfunction, and there was a lot of suffering that you had to endure, and a lot of confusion that came your way, and a lot of mixed messages, and a lot of that emotional the emotional pieces around not feeling safe and being, all that confusion. So I'm really curious about how all of that affected your mental health at the time. I mean, I know at the time you might not have known your mental health was affected or know exactly what you were going through. But now, as you're looking back, as you recall, what did you feel was happening to your mental health?
I think that I was just I've been a very reactive person. And I remember seeing a therapist during my marriage, and my therapist would say to me, Farahana, you can go from being completely content and happy to rageful. Like you don't even hit anger. You don't even pause at anger. You completely turn rageful. So if the dial's at green, it was beyond red. And so self-regulation of emotions was just not, and then having a conversation with me was like, you couldn't even have a conversation with me, because once I hit that point of rage, my rage has been banging my fists against the wall. My rage has looked like hitting my partner, um, uh, saying the most hurtful things, because it's like if you tell me that I am effed up because of my parents, well, there was still, even though I had experienced difficulties with my parents, there was still a layer of protection even then, you don't want anybody to say anything bad about your parents. I mean, and it's almost like I knew exactly how to stab that person with my words. Even if it wasn't true, I was going to say the most hurtful things back, because you know what? You hurt me, I'm going to turn around and hurt you 10 times worse. And I know exactly how to say it. So, anything that I knew my partner was sensitive about, maybe had shared, basically what it was, Sanima, as I speak now, my vulnerability was thrown at me. So what he was vulnerable about, I was going to throw at him. Everything you claim this person is apparently quote unquote doing to you, you're like, I'm actually doing the same thing. And in that manner, then, as we grow and go through our healing more, you realize that every story that you told to separate that person from you so that you look like the us and they look like the other, you actually realize that the us and the other merge together as one. They are the same thing.
Yeah, and as you move away from like the tit for tat, you can actually look at what the messages are. You can look at what the underlying themes become and what the triggers are and where the vulnerability lies. And it sounds like you've, over the years, put a lot of work into finding what those are for you and connecting with them. So I'm curious about what your key messages, what your key message or messages are to the listeners of the show.
I'll just tell you that, and I'll tell the listeners, is that we all have, even the people who who sound like they have it all together, I'll tell you that it didn't happen overnight. It's like going to the gym and you see somebody with a beautiful body and you wish your body would just pop into shape like that. You know that person has worked immensely hard, and it was not easy, and it was blood, sweat, irritation, anger, not feeling like doing it, but they pushed themselves through it to get there. And I'll just say that our inner work, our healing is exactly that. It is a commitment on a daily basis to do the work. It's a commitment without judgment, which is what mindfulness is. I think it's about time that we started to lift up that mirror that I called mindfulness. For me, mindfulness and mirror is the same thing, but lift up that mirror and start looking at our own selves. You know what? We're not going to be able to change the other person, but change has to begin with us.
Absolutely. Great messages. Really great messages. And so, Farahana, what would be a cause or organization that you would want to give a shout out to that perhaps was impactful to you on your journey that reflects your untold story, perhaps, maybe?
When I got into mindfulness, I first of all got into it without even knowing it. But when I then knew there was such a thing as mindfulness and I explored and I wanted to get certified, I got certified through mindfulschools.org. And I would definitely give a shout out to them for their instruction, for their instructors, for their content, just for the full-on value that I got for, becoming certified and opening up my horizons even more to what mindfulness is and how I can share it with the world, but especially sharing it with children, because we need to start as early as we possibly can. The first child I was able to take it to, and I continue to take it to, is my son.
That's beautiful.
It's a wonderful organization. And for me, taking all the information that I've learned and now creating that and making it my own has been, spectacular. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without their foundation. So I just want to give a big, huge shout out to them.
Mindfulschools.org. Amazing. So how are you findable if people want to connect with you?
Yeah, it's Instagram and Facebook. I'm on there. You just search for Farahana Surya Namaskar. I will share all my information about my children's books as well, because I've written a couple of children's books, all focused around mindfulness. And so, you can find out more about my books online. They're available through Amazon. I'm very proud of that work. So, yes.
Amazing. Okay. So, Farahana, guess what?
We are well on the way to being done, I think.
Well, I think really what I wanted to say is that you just dared yourself to share. So congratulations. You did it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an honor.
I hope that this experience was good for you.
It was wonderful, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I did. I'm actually so thankful for your willingness to be part of the podcast and to share with such gentleness and humility some of the most difficult aspects of your life's journey, especially, trailing all the way back to your young age. And you have incredible perspective and insight. And the way that you show up with the gratitude in everything you do, this is admirable. And it's a really a great reminder of what is in our control. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the sharing.
No problem at all. You're most welcome, Slima.
All right. Once again, Farahana, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.